$340,000. That's what she sent to the man she believed would become her husband. The man who called her every morning, who shared his dreams of their future together, who made her feel seen after years of loneliness. He was already married. He had a wife, a family, a completely separate life she knew nothing about. And she was far from the only victim. Romance scams have become the most financially devastating form of fraud in America, with victims losing over $1.3 billion in 2024 alone. But the money tells only half the story. What makes these crimes so destructive isn't just the financial ruin. It's the emotional devastation that comes from discovering the person you loved never existed at all. The mechanics of how these scams work have evolved into something far more sophisticated than most people realize. This isn't some poorly written email from a supposed Nigerian prince anymore. Modern romance scammers use artificial intelligence to generate realistic photos and videos. They craft thousands of messages that feel genuinely personal. They spend months building relationships before money ever enters the conversation. By the time they ask for help, victims are already emotionally invested in a relationship that feels completely real. Kate Kleinert had been widowed for over a decade when a handsome surgeon named Tony sent her a friend request on Facebook in August 2020. She'd sworn off dating entirely after losing her husband to cancer. But Tony seemed different. He claimed to be a Norwegian doctor working for the United Nations in Iraq. He shared her interests in dogs and gardening. They moved their conversations to Google Hangouts, talking and texting multiple times every day. The relationship moved quickly. Tony told her about his 2 children at an English boarding school. Then he asked if they could call her mom. Kate had never had children of her own. That request hit something deep inside her, a vulnerability she didn't even know she was carrying. It was her Achilles heel, as she later described it, the thing that made her believe. Over the following months, Tony drained $39,000 from Kate's accounts. He took what remained of her late husband's life insurance, her savings, her Social Security and pension benefits, everything she had. When the truth finally came out, Kate was left broke and heartbroken, forced to rebuild her entire financial life in her 60s. But Kate's losses pale in comparison to what happened to Jackie Crenshaw, a Connecticut woman who lost close to $1 million. Jackie had built a successful career in the medical field, managing dozens of people, making important decisions every day. She was intelligent, educated, capable. None of that protected her from Brandon. Brandon texted her every morning. They prayed together daily. Over time, Jackie accumulated 20,000 text messages from him. 20,000 moments of connection that felt genuine and real. He convinced her to invest in cryptocurrency opportunities, promising returns that would secure their future together. Her retirement savings disappeared into digital wallets she couldn't trace. The withdrawals added to her taxable income, leaving her owing money to the IRS on funds that had been stolen from her. Shortly after discovering the truth, Jackie found herself in a grocery store sampling smoked Gouda. She asked the associate how much it cost. $8. She couldn't afford it. A woman who'd spent her entire career in positions of authority suddenly couldn't buy cheese. That moment crystallized the complete devastation these scams create. What's striking about both Kate and Jackie's stories is how the scammers identified and exploited specific emotional vulnerabilities. Kate's longing for children. Jackie's desire to finally be taken care of after spending her life caring for others. These weren't random attacks. They were precisely targeted operations designed to bypass rational thinking by triggering powerful emotional needs. The sophistication doesn't stop there. Romance scammers have developed detailed playbooks that dictate exactly how to build trust over time. They claim to be doctors, military personnel stationed overseas, construction workers on international projects, or successful investors. These covers provide built-in excuses for why they can't meet in person while maintaining an air of legitimacy and stability. They start by establishing rapport through shared interests and values. They move conversations to private messaging apps where there's no oversight. They profess strong feelings quickly, creating an artificial sense of intimacy and urgency. Then they begin weaving stories about unexpected emergencies, investment opportunities, or bureaucratic problems that require financial help. The requests start small. A few $100s for a medical emergency, money for a visa so they can finally visit, payment for fees to release inheritance funds. Each request comes with a plausible explanation and a promise that this is the last time they'll need to ask. But there's always another emergency, another opportunity, another obstacle standing between the victim and the future they've been promised. By the time victims realize they're being scammed, they've often sent money multiple times. The average victim makes 11 separate payments before discovering the truth, losing around $15,000 total. But those are just averages. The real devastation shows up in cases like Jackie's, where losses climb into 6 or 7 figures. What makes recovery so difficult isn't just the money, it's the shame. NBC News interviewed a woman named Martha, who'd sent $32,000 to someone claiming to be a San Diego architect working in Poland. When asked what she missed most, the money or the love, Martha went quiet. Then she whispered, "I would say the love." She explained that losing his affection and the family she'd imagined having hurt far more than the financial loss. Nobody in her life knows what happened. Not her family, not her friends. She's carrying the weight of both the financial and emotional devastation completely alone because the shame feels unbearable. That shame keeps victims silent. It prevents them from seeking help or reporting the crime. It leaves them isolated with their grief and their empty bank accounts. Nearly 60,000 Americans officially reported romance scam losses in 2024, but experts believe the real number is far higher. Most victims never tell anyone what happened. The question isn't whether these scams are sophisticated. They obviously are. The question is why they keep working despite growing public awareness. What psychological mechanisms make intelligent, successful, cautious people vulnerable to fraud that seems obvious in hindsight? And how have scammers adapted their tactics to exploit the specific ways our brains process trust and love? The answer lies in how our brains are wired for connection. Humans evolved to form bonds quickly because social connection meant survival. When someone shows interest in us, expresses vulnerability, shares personal details, our neurochemistry responds. Oxytocin floods our system during intimate conversations. Dopamine spikes when we receive messages from someone we're attracted to. These aren't conscious choices. They're automatic biological responses that scammers have learned to trigger deliberately. Romance scammers exploit what psychologists call the commitment and consistency principle. Once we've invested time, emotion, and identity into a relationship, our brains resist evidence that contradicts that investment. We've told friends about this new person. We've imagined a future together. We've sent money to help them through a crisis. Admitting it's all fake means admitting we were fooled, that our judgment failed, that those feelings were manufactured. So instead, victims rationalize. They explain away inconsistencies. They make excuses for why the person can't video chat clearly or why another emergency came up. They send more money because they've already sent so much that walking away would mean accepting total loss. Psychologists call this the sunk cost fallacy, and scammers build their entire strategy around it. The introduction of artificial intelligence has made these psychological manipulations exponentially more effective. The FBI reports that criminals now use AI to generate realistic photos, videos, and voice messages that can fool even skeptical targets. They're using AI to write emotionally persuasive messages that adapt to each victim's communication style and vulnerabilities. Deepfake technology means scammers can now conduct video calls using stolen footage of real people, manipulated in real time to appear responsive. They can create entire libraries of content showing their life, their home, their supposed children. The digital evidence that once might have exposed a scam now reinforces it. These aren't clumsy operations anymore. Scammers exchange thousands of messages before money ever enters the conversation. They learn your schedule, your fears, your dreams, what makes you laugh. They build a relationship that feels more attentive and emotionally present than many real ones. Then, when they finally ask for money, it's framed as a temporary crisis in an otherwise solid relationship. That's exactly what happened to a Montana woman named Rita, who lost $90,000 to someone posing as a celebrity. The celebrity reached out on social media, then moved the conversation to an encrypted app. Over months, they built what felt like a genuine connection. When financial requests came, they were explained as legal troubles or business complications that a public figure couldn't handle through normal channels. Rita's case reveals another disturbing trend. Celebrity impersonation scams have exploded, with criminals pretending to be actors, musicians, and public figures. A woman in Argentina lost $15,000 to someone posing as George Clooney, complete with AI-generated messages and videos. Another victim sent over $375,000 to a fake Martin Henderson. These scams work because they tap into fantasy. The victim isn't just falling for a stranger. They're falling for a life they've imagined, a status they've dreamed about, a story they can barely believe is happening to them. That emotional intensity overrides the logical questions they would normally ask. But sometimes the consequences extend beyond financial and emotional devastation into territory that's almost unimaginable. Laura Cole was a 57-year-old widow and retired healthcare executive from Galena, Illinois. She met someone on Match.com who called himself Frank Borg. Over nearly 2 years, she sent him close to $2 million. Not in one payment, but gradually, as Frank presented one crisis after another. By the end, Frank had drained everything. Then the scammers did something that's becoming increasingly common. They recruited Laura to help move money from other victims. CBS News discovered that Laura was being instructed to set up fake companies and bank accounts to launder funds. She'd transitioned from victim to unwitting accomplice in a broader criminal operation. Laura disappeared before the full scope became clear. Her death remains connected to the scam that consumed the final years of her life. Her daughter, Kelly Gu, spoke about the anger she carries. "I look at my life now, and my mom is missing out on all of that. They took so much away from me. They took everything away from her." This pattern of victims becoming perpetrators represents one of the most disturbing evolutions in romance fraud. Lori Ann Kimball, a 52-year-old woman from Castle Rock, fell victim to someone calling himself Joe Hart after her husband died. Joe claimed to work on an offshore oil rig, which explained why he couldn't meet in person. Over 2 years, Lori moved $3.5 million from at least 15 other victims into Joe Hart's digital wallet. She used 20 bank accounts and 7 cryptocurrency accounts, opening new ones whenever institutions started asking questions. A police officer warned her twice that she was committing crimes. Another victim confronted her directly. She kept going anyway. That level of psychological control seems incomprehensible until you understand how deeply scammers manipulate their targets. They don't just steal money, they reconstruct reality itself, creating a world where the victim's actions make perfect sense even when everyone outside that world can see the truth. The financial mechanisms have evolved too. The largest reported losses now involve cryptocurrency, with victims losing $139 million through crypto payments in a single year. Scammers have merged romance fraud with investment scams in what's called pig butchering. They build the romantic relationship, then casually mention their success with cryptocurrency or forex trading. They suggest the victim invest small amounts at first. The platform shows impressive returns, so the victim invests more, then more. Eventually, they're told the account has grown substantially, but there's a fee to withdraw, or taxes that must be paid up front, or some other barrier. When they send that money, everything disappears. The relationship, the platform, the profits, all of it. Jackie Crenshaw experienced exactly this trajectory. She lost close to $1 million through a combination of romance and investment fraud. Brandon, her supposed partner, sent her 20,000 text messages over their relationship. They prayed together every morning. He built such a complete emotional world that when he suggested cryptocurrency investments, it felt like guidance from someone who genuinely cared about her future. Her retirement savings vanished. Then came the tax bill from the IRS because the withdrawals counted as taxable income. Shortly after discovering the truth, Jackie found herself in a grocery store sampling smoked Gouda. She asked the price. $8. She couldn't afford it. A woman who'd spent decades building a medical career, managing teams, making complex decisions, stood there realizing she couldn't buy cheese. That moment crystallizes what these scams actually steal. Not just money, but the dignity of self-sufficiency. The psychological damage often exceeds the financial loss. NBC interviewed a victim named Martha and asked what she missed most, the money or the love. She went silent for several seconds before whispering, "I would say the love." She explained that losing his affection, losing the family she thought she'd have, losing the future she'd imagined, all of that hurt more than the $32,000. A FINRA Foundation study found nearly 2/3 of fraud victims experience severe emotional consequences, including stress, anxiety, insomnia, and depression. Romance scam victims carry additional grief because they're not just mourning money. They're mourning a relationship that never existed. That shame creates dangerous isolation. More than 250 victims in San Diego alone reported losses exceeding $9 million in 2025. But those numbers undercount reality because most victims never tell anyone. Martha hasn't informed her family or friends about the $32,000 she sent to a man claiming to be a San Diego architect working in Poland. The embarrassment of believing someone she never met in person feels too heavy to share. So, how do you recognize these operations before they consume everything? The patterns are consistent once you know what to look for. They can't meet in person and always have elaborate reasons why. They're overseas, on an oil rig, in the military, working for international organizations, anywhere that sounds plausible but remains conveniently unreachable. They ask for money once trust is established. Medical expenses for themselves or family members, travel costs to finally visit you, visa fees, legal troubles that need immediate resolution. Their photos look professionally edited, almost like magazine models because they're usually stolen from actual models or public figures. They profess intense feelings after minimal interaction and push to move conversations off the original platform onto private messaging apps where there's less oversight. Grammar issues appear despite claims of being native English speakers. They promise to meet you repeatedly, but cancel every time. They mention wealth from cryptocurrency or forex trading. They're notably younger than you, but claim age doesn't matter. Each of these red flags alone might have an innocent explanation. Together, they form a signature. Recovery remains brutally difficult. Organizations like the Cybercrime Support Network offer free 10-week counselor-led programs specifically for romance scam victims. The AARP Fraud Watch Network provides helplines staffed by trained specialists. These resources help with the emotional processing, the shame, the isolation that follows discovery. Financial recovery is harder. Swift action matters. Contact your bank immediately. File reports with the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, local law enforcement, and every financial institution involved. Some banks follow reimbursement codes that might provide grounds for refunds, though success isn't guaranteed. The reality is that most money never comes back. Scammers operate from overseas jurisdictions where U.S. law enforcement has limited reach. Funds move through complex cryptocurrency networks designed specifically to be untraceable. The digital wallet receiving your payment distributes money across dozens of accounts within hours. By the time you realize what happened, the trail has fragmented beyond recovery. What makes this crisis so insidious is how it exploits the best parts of human nature: the capacity for trust, the desire for connection, the hope that vulnerability might be rewarded rather than punished. These aren't weaknesses, they're what make relationships possible. Scammers have industrialized the process of weaponizing those qualities, turning natural human longing into a production line of exploitation. The grandmother sending money to a supposed surgeon isn't stupid. The widow believing in a second chance at companionship isn't naive. The professional convinced by 20,000 loving text messages isn't foolish. They're human beings encountering predators who've spent years perfecting techniques specifically designed to bypass rational thinking and target emotional need. In 2024 alone, nearly 59,000 Americans reported falling victim. The real number is certainly higher because shame silences more victims than it reveals. This isn't about individual failure. It's about systematic exploitation enabled by technology that allows criminals to operate across borders with minimal risk while victims bear complete consequences. Until platforms implement better verification, until law enforcement develops better international cooperation, until society stops treating victims like they deserved what happened, these operations will continue destroying lives one fabricated relationship at a time. The next time you hear about someone losing money to a romance scam, remember Jackie standing in that grocery store unable to afford cheese. Remember Laura's daughter talking about everything her mother will miss. Remember that behind every statistic is someone who simply wanted what most people want: to be loved, to matter to someone, to believe that connection was possible. That desire didn't make them vulnerable. The people who exploited it did. Understanding these patterns won't eliminate risk entirely, but it shifts the odds dramatically in your favor. The scammers counting on isolation, shame, and silence to keep their operations running. Every person who learns to recognize the signs, who shares information with vulnerable friends and family, who refuses to let embarrassment prevent reporting, weakens that system. If someone in your life suddenly seems involved with a romantic partner they've never met who keeps asking for money, don't dismiss it as foolishness. Approach with compassion, not judgment. Provide information without condemnation. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is help someone see what they can't see themselves while they're still inside the manipulation. And if you're reading this realizing you might be caught in one of these schemes right now, know that stopping doesn't mean admitting failure. It means recognizing you encountered professionals who've perfected these techniques against thousands of victims. The shame belongs to them, not you. Contact your bank today. File reports with the FBI and local police. reach out to the Cybercrime Support Network or AARP Fraud Watch helpline. Every day you wait makes recovery harder. The woman who sent $340,000 didn't lack intelligence or judgment. She encountered criminals who understood exactly which emotional buttons to press and in what sequence. That's what these operations do. They don't find weak people. They create moments of weakness in strong people, then exploit those moments with industrial precision. The only real protection is knowing how the system works before you're standing in a grocery store, realizing you can't afford cheese.